The season would resume after the Hungarian Grand Prix. The close fight between the two continued, with a mere 3 points separating them as they headed into the next Grand Prix in Monza. McLaren achieved a historic 1-2 at their fiercest rivals track, with Fernando Alonso taking the win and staying in contention for the World Drivers' Championship. The happiness at McLaren was evident, with Ron Dennis even crying with joy. Because this was the team's greatest joy after so many months filled with controversy. But that happiness would last very little, because a week later the nightmare that would take away McLaren's sleep would begin. Nothing further at the start of Friday practice for the Belgian Grand Prix. Formula One would be shaken by the news that McLaren had been excluded from the World Constructors' Championship. This is because McLaren was found guilty of spying on the Ferrari team. Yes, we did mention earlier that the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile chose not to penalize the team because of insufficient evidence. This was due to their inability to prove that the information possessed by Mike Hoagland had been used by another team member. However, to know what happened, why did the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile verdict change? We will have to briefly go back in time and place ourselves again at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Alonso and Ron Dennis exchanged heated words and insults, following a major argument after the Grand Prix qualifying session. Fernando, showing his temperament, threatened Ron Dennis with showing the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile the emails where it was shown that McLaren always knew about Kutla's espionage issue. Ron Dennis knew his driver's explosive temper made this a genuine threat. And in an absurd attempt to prevent it, he decided to contact Max Mosley, the then president of the International Automobile Federation, to tell him about this alleged threat. Upon learning the new details, Max Mosley chose to reopen the case, and he asked Hamilton, Alonso, and Pedro de la Rosa to send all the documentation they had in their hands, including emails, under threat that if they did not deliver all this information, they would be disqualified from the 2007 season. Hamilton sent nothing, but Alonso and de la Rosa shared all information from their emails. In this, it was discovered that, indeed, McLaren always knew about the espionage issue and used the confidential information from Ferrari that they had at their disposal. Because of this, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile declared them guilty and punished them with exclusion from the Constructors' Championship that season. In addition to imposing a $100 million fine on the team, this automatically caused McLaren to lose the World Constructors' title, but Fernando Alonso and Hamilton could still compete for the driver's title. By then, most of McLaren's leadership blamed Alonso for the situation, as his threat initiated the entire ordeal. Hamilton demanded the Asturian's dismissal, claiming she had shown disloyalty to the team and shouldn't remain with them. In 2008, after the Belgium Grand Prix, the point difference between the two was only 2. With 3 races remaining, the battle between the two was predicted to escalate to levels worse than previously seen. In the next Grand Prix in Japan, at the Fuji circuit, Fernando took a hard hit while battling his teammate for the win. This meant that if Hamilton won that race, he would clinch the World Drivers' Championship and potentially make history as the only rookie driver to ever do so. After Nino Farina, he would achieve it, which is exactly what happened. Hamilton won the race under the heavy rain in Fuji, leaving him at an advantage. The World Championship for drivers to achieve it at the Chinese Grand Prix. Currently, only Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen could potentially challenge the British driver for the World Championship. Hamilton was 12 points ahead of Fernando and 17 points ahead of Kimi. And this again with 2 races to go and only 20 points up for grabs. For Hamilton to become champion, he only needed to finish ahead of Fernando in the Chinese Grand Prix and score 4 more points than Kimi Raikkonen. If Hamilton finished on the podium and Fernando didn't win, he would become the 2007 season world champion, making history. All the possibilities were on the British side. It depended on him, and only him, to achieve his long-awaited first world title. McLaren came to China hoping to celebrate finally winning the sought-after title after enduring numerous issues throughout the season. During the classification, Hamilton secured the pole position and was set to claim his year of glory on Sunday. But the weather would not make things so easy for the GP2 champion. Just as the competition began, rain would make its presence felt, forcing the drivers to mount intermediate tires. During the race, Hamilton and Raikkonen pulled away from the other drivers, with Fernando in 4th, but at a slower pace. After a few laps, the time for pit stops would come, where none of the McLaren and Ferrari drivers would change their tires and would only refuel. Because even though the rain had disappeared, they were hoping it would come back stronger. After the pit stops, Kimi Raikkonen started chasing Hamilton and eventually overtook him later in the race. Hamilton was desperate as he reported excessive wear on his tires, a wear that was potentially dangerous. At this point, McLaren decided to call Hamilton back to the pits to change that set of tires. And on lap 30, disaster would strike at the worst possible moment.
When Hamilton comes out, he will likely have slick dry tires, forcing Fernandez to follow. Hamilton is out. Wait, he might be there. Let's see.
He could stay there. Be careful. Be careful. Pozzoliana is there. He could stay there. He's ducked. He's ducked. He's ducked. No, he can't. Everything's going to come out of him. He can't get a push.
He's on the floor line.
Due to the wear of his tires, Hamilton has made a mistake entering the pit lane and has gotten stuck in the gravel. The British man's desperation was evident as no one could help him get back on track. He thought someone would push him just a few meters to get the car out of that place and resume the race, but no one could help him. Hamilton had no choice but to get out of the car and watch as Kimi Raikkonen won the race, and his rival Fernando Alonso finished in second place. Returning to what seemed to be Hamilton's coronation, a three-way fight for the world title in the last race of the year. Drama at the highest level, and Brazil would be the witness to the conclusion of a memorable season, but that still had one last dramatic twist in the script for us. After the 2007 Chinese Grand Prix, the championship contenders were narrowed down to Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, and Lewis Hamilton. Despite the events in China, Hamilton still had a chance at the championship, leading with 107 points. Alonso was second with 103 points, and Kimi Raikkonen third with 100 points. The latter being the one who would need a miracle to become world champion. So if Hamilton wanted to be the winner, he just needed Fernando not to achieve victory, and in case he did, he had to be at least second. To beat Raikkonen, regardless of what position the Finn finished in, Hamilton only needed to be fifth, so a priori, the world championship was practically his for the taking. Ferrari would manage to put Felipe further in the pole position, and Hamilton would achieve what he needed to be second in front of his two main rivals. At the Grand Prix start, nerves got the best of him as he quickly lost position to Kimi Raikkonen and Alonso. However, in a baffling move, Hamilton attempts to fight for position with his teammate, but makes an error in the sun curve. A mistake cost him several positions, which no one understands. Because even with fourth place, Hamilton was in the position he needed to be world champion. Afterward, he would drop to seventh place, needing to overtake at least two rivals to guard against a potential win by Kimi Raikkonen. But on lap 7 would come the moment that would define the world championship that season. The British driver's gearbox would fail and get stuck in neutral, causing him to lose speed and be overtaken by all the drivers coming up behind him. Fortunately for him, he was able to get back on track moments later, but he would be relegated to the 18th position. Felipe Massa would lead the race, but Raikkonen was right behind him and needed the first position to be able to become world champion. At that precise moment, Alonso was virtually achieving his third world championship. But all of us who were watching that race knew it was a mirage. Ferrari only needed to swap their drivers' positions, leaving Alonso and Hamilton with no other options. If Fernando wanted to be champion, he needed to overtake one of the two Ferrari drivers and manage to get into second position so he could become world champion. But in that race, his McLaren was not as fast as the Ferraris that were ahead of him, and at no point could he even challenge them. During the rest of the remaining 60 laps, the great attraction of the race was to see if Hamilton could make up the ground to reach fifth place. Lap after lap, he overtook his rivals, but he was still far from that coveted fifth place. Fernando couldn't do anything more. All he had left was to wait for one of the Ferraris to have a mechanical problem to become world champion. But the laps went by and this did not happen. After the pit stops, Ferrari swapped their drivers' positions without team orders, and Hamilton couldn't reach fifth place. The laps were running out, McLaren was about to finish cooking up the biggest embarrassment in the team's history. And upon reaching lap 71, the driver that no one expected, the one with the least chances. The joker of that season achieved victory and took the Formula One World Drivers' Championship by just 1 point. Ferrari had snatched away the team's last chance to finish with some dignity from 2007 in that race. But in the end, they left Brazil empty-handed, their faces covered in shame, and having to endure the mockery of Ferrari and all of Formula One. Lewis Hamilton lost the world title in the season's final 2 races, a world championship that he had nearly won. Fernando had lost the world title in Japan. Despite the odds, he reached the championship in Brazil and contended for a 3rd world title, but unfortunately fell short. Hamilton and Alonso came to hate each other during that season. The tension between them triggered a snowball that grew larger with each race and ultimately ended up colliding with the team. Both, driven by ego, ambition, and lust for power, did everything possible to destroy each other. Ron Dennis had to witness a situation similar to what occurred in 1989. He tore the team apart in a season that promised to be the historic return to the top for the British brand. In my opinion, that's the main cause of this fight. Because if he had been stricter with Hamilton's defiance, better managed Alonso's temper, and not let them push this fight to the brink, would this situation have occurred? At the end of 2007, Alonso departed from the British team. He said McLaren didn't respect him as a 2-time world champion, and was tired of them harming him to benefit their young prospect. Or at least this, in the words of the Asturian, determined not to go through the same thing again. He reached an agreement with McLaren and Renault to return to the team that crowned his career, with several years left on his contract. In exchange, McLaren received Heikki Kovalainen. And thus they forgot about the one who, according to McLaren, was responsible for the Spygate scandal becoming public and the subsequent consequences they received. Alonso and Hamilton would battle again in 2010 and 2012 for the world title. But this rivalry would end the moment Alonso set foot outside of McLaren. The fierce, tense, and controversial on-track battles between them would never be seen again, ending thus with the magic of their battles in this rivalry. A rivalry that resulted in a team's self-destruction, historical embarrassment, and 2 drivers left empty-handed. But I want to know, what was your experience of this fight? What were your emotions in each of their confrontations, and which of the 2 was the driver you supported? This chapter of the miniseries was chosen by you, my dear audience, as you voted for this rivalry in the survey we conducted some time ago. And again, I give you the opportunity to be the one to decide who will be the protagonist of the next chapter. On our personal and official Twitter, we have opened a poll, one in which you can vote for who you want to be the protagonist of the next chapter. The 3 most voted rivalries will be taken into account for the next chapter of this miniseries, so it's up to you to choose who will be the protagonist of the next story we tell. And while you're at it, give us a follow on our Twitter page. If you like this video, follow us on our account, so that we can continue to grow this community and we can continue to bring you the best possible content on Skyline Racing. But if you like this content, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share it with your friends. For my part, I say goodbye wishing you an excellent day, and see you in the next edition of legendary Formula One Rivalries. Thank you for tuning in, and see you later.